Welcome to the Life After 50 show. I'm Katherine Watson, and I will be your host today. I am here by courtesy of Find Houston Senior Care, our sponsor today. Find Houston Senior Care is a web directory that helps people to find any kind of solutions that they may need in elder care, senior living, senior care, in the greater Houston area. So we're a one-stop resource for the greater Houston area. I'm here today with Barry Crispin. She is with a company called A Sacred Choice. A Sacred Choice is a new way of developing, or not developing, a new way of having your funerals. So we're going to be talking to Lacey all about funerals and funeral planning. I know it may not be your favorite subject out there, but it's one that you really need to pay attention to because let's face it, it's going to affect all of us at one time or another. So if you haven't been touched, if you haven't had to plan a funeral for somebody, if you haven't had that experience, there are a lot of things you need to know. If you have questions, feel free to post them in the comments. If you're watching us live, we'll answer those questions on the air. If you're watching the replay, go ahead and post them. I'll make sure that Barry gets the questions. Her partner, Lacey, couldn't be with us today. She developed a cold and was coughing quite a bit. So we'll be here with Barry Crispin. She is a former assistant vice president of George H. Lewis and Sons Funeral Directors. She's a native Houstonian who entered the funeral profession in July of 2010. And I had an interesting conversation with Barry before the show. And I'm just going to let her tell you in her own words how she got into this industry, because it's not the kind of industry that you usually think of when you're maybe a teenager planning out your career ahead. So let me bring Barry on up to the top. Hi, Barry. How are you?
Hi, good morning, Miss Catherine. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, thank you for taking the time out because there's so much information about this subject that people don't know. I know Absolutely. I have some questions myself for you. But we were talking before, and, it's a subject that a lot of people kind of shy away from, funerals. So how did you get involved in this?
So it's a funny story. I was at Sam Houston State University working on my bachelor's for business. And through my last 2 years, I needed internship credits. So I always wanted something different on my resume. I thought funeral home is, a little different. I'm going to try it. I spoke with my counselor, and the local funeral home was kind enough to allow me to do my internship there. And that was Sam Houston Memorial Funeral Home. I thank them, and I owe a lot to them because they were able to just grab me by the hand and show me everything that I knew at that time. And I loved it. I don't think I've ever done anything that makes me feel as good and as servable as this. And it's something different that allows me to be able to help others. And at the same time, when I lay my head to sleep at night, I feel good about what I did. So
wonderful, wonderful. Mm-hmm. So we are here today. Barry, there's a big funeral on the minds of a lot of people out there. Senator John McCain has passed away. And though it was we knew he was going to be passing fairly soon. I mean, he had brain cancer. Everybody was aware. It still hits people hard sometimes when this happens. He's having a huge, obviously, funeral service, and he pre-planned everything from who is invited, who's not invited, all of that, who's going to be talking at his funeral. And this is something that, some people do. Mm-hmm. But what I've heard from you is a lot of people are not going the route of the big fancy funeral with lots of people and lots of pomp and circumstance. They're
Correct.
choosing another route. So let's talk about that a little bit, please.
Absolutely. So Senator McCain, he has a team of people that he can speak to and list all the wishes that he wants to take place. But for the regular person, we don't have a team that can take all of those notes. Um, we don't even think about that because we don't know what questions to ask. Therefore, we never receive the answers. And so, what we're going to do today is, of course, answer any questions that you may have. And at the same time, if there's anything that you've dealt with or that you still have in the back of your mind that you're not exactly sure how it took place, I'm here to help in any way that I can. So writing
Okay.
down your wishes or how things have changed. Most people don't want a large service. Uh, in the first place, they may not even want a funeral. They might want to just move forward with cremation, which is one of the biggest changes that has taken place.
Yeah.
Uh, before everyone wanted to be buried next in,
Mhm.
to their mom, to their dad in the family plot. And now people have moved. They no longer live where they were born. They've moved to other states, they've moved to other
Right.
countries. I mean, there's so many options. And with cremation, you are able to have those options. The service is independent of the cremation itself. You're able to have a memorial service that can take place outside. It can take place in a vineyard. It can take place wherever you would like, honestly. It can be intimate, such as just family members, or it can be public, where you invite everyone and anyone that you. So,
Yeah, yeah. So it is interesting. People have changed a lot. I know I've gone to more people are calling them a celebration of life, and
mhm.
I really like that. The word funeral, let's face it, has not had the happiest of thoughts for most people. But celebration of life, how can you not be happy with that?
Mhm.
So I think a lot of people are going that route. I know my own brother, when he passed away, we had a big party. He lived in New Orleans for a number of years and died in Slidell, but all of his friends were from New Orleans in that era. So we had a party, and that's
Mhm.
what it was supposed to be. It was a celebration of his life and his legacy, and I
I'm
love
sure
that.
lots of music and lots
Yeah.
of good food.
Lots of music. Oh, we had tons of good food. We had a full bar. We had dancing. We had everything,
Mhm.
because that was the culture of that area.
Mhm.
So I've been to other ones where it's just a simple, quiet celebration of life for friends and families to
Mhm.
sit around and tell stories and anecdotes and remember things from the past, and that is healing in itself. And I think
Mhm.
really, when you think about it, that's really funerals are designed for, is for us to begin that healing process for the
Correct.
family and friends and people who cared about someone, to begin that healing process to move
Mhm.
on.
Yeah, and I think just like you said, funerals are for the living. They
Mhm.
are to commemorate the person that passed, but if you really think about it, it's like you said, for the healing, for that process to begin. So,
Yeah, yeah.
mhm.
Now, there are still a lot of people that do want to do more of a traditional type funeral with a casket. They do not want to do
Mhm.
cremation. Maybe it's against their particular religious beliefs, or they just don't like the idea of it. Whatever the reason is,
Mhm.
they want to go that route. Let's talk about that, because there's different options with that.
Definitely. And I think one of the very first things that people always ask is, if I want to be buried, what is the very first thing I should do when I pass? And there's a lot of circumstances that one needs to take into consideration. If you pass away at home and your death is unattended, meaning there is not a doctor, you're not under hospice, uh, there is no one there aside from just a family member or someone else, you have to call 911.
Okay.
There is no way around it. you have to do that, and they will in turn call the medical examiner, and the medical examiner determines whether an autopsy needs to take place or not.
So an autopsy doesn't always have to take place if somebody dies at home. I thought that it did.
That is correct. So it depends on the medical examiner and what they choose. If they're able to speak with the doctor that's been taking care of their loved one,
Hmm.
or they find circumstances that say, everything is okay. It just seems that they had, X factor took place. Then they're
Hmm.
able to release, and then the police officers and police are called to the funeral.
Okay. So if somebody that you loved, if your spouse, for instance, had a heart attack at home or in a hotel room, you're visiting, you're on vacation or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you should always call 911. That's the
Yes,
first
ma'am.
step. If you're
Yes,
in the United States, if you're in another country, it's probably a whole different uh, can of worms that
correct.
you have to figure out what to do. I don't know if you can speak on situations like that.
I've had a few families. It's the same process. The authorities are still notified.
Okay.
And now the process changed country to country, of course,
Hmm.
but I imagine it's the same. The authorities will be notified. Then after, I'm not sure which, some countries may or may not have medical examiners, but for the most part, I believe they are just to hold the decedent until the family is contacted.
Hmm.
If the family is there, then they would have to make a decision of, whether they want to fly them back to the United States, whether they want to be buried there. They've lived, 30, 40 years in another country, or if
Hmm.
they decided to be cremated and just fly the urn back and
Hmm.
have a celebration of life here in the United States.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's so many different choices and things
There
that to think
are.
about. I have a friend that she, when I told her we were going to do this show, she told me, she said, I'm single and I don't have any children.
Mhm.
She never had any children. She doesn't have a spouse, and she says, I'm not really sure what I should do. And I would definitely urge her to pre-plan her funeral.
Mhm. Definitely. And with pre planning, some people think, well, if I pre plan, then that means that I am welcoming that to take place, the death to take place. And that's not the case. I would say when you pre plan, you're essentially setting out your decisions, your wishes in paper. And for your friend, I would even recommend there is a document. It's called an appointment of agent to control disposition. And that just means, if you don't have any family members and you want to appoint someone, you can
Mhm.
have that document ready, have their information filled in. Of course, it has to be notarized. And it actually gives the option for two people to be placed. So there's your first option, first person. Then, in case something happens to that person, there is a
Right.
second option. And any funeral home is able to use that document. By law, the next of kin is the one that either has to provide the information, especially for a cremation. They're the ones that would have to sign documents. But if you have the appointment of agent to control disposition, which we can provide a copy of,
Mhm.
then that it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And with pre-planning, if I would say have that document and then decide whether you want burial or cremation, and it helps you not just to freeze the price, but if let's say you want a funeral service and it's anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000, just depending on what funeral home you go to, well then you don't have to pay that amount all at once. You're able to break it up in payments, and
Mhm.
you're taken care of, and your family members are taken care of, and you don't leave it as a guessing game for your children or your
Yeah.
spouse to decide, well, we never talked about it. I don't know. And
Hmm.
then, emotional decisions are made, and you don't want them to be the wrong decisions because you never know.
Right, right. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's really, really important. And I talk about this with everything. communication, people. We've
Mhm.
got to communicate with our families. We've got to talk about our finances. We've got to talk about our wishes for when we do pass away or when we
Mhm.
get ill. It's so important to talk about these things with your family and make sure they understand.
Mhm.
I know my mother-in-law didn't have everything planned. Like I said, we had to choose the casket, and there were a few things that we had to make decisions on, but a lot of it was taken care of, and that did help. Um, it would have been better if everything would have been taken care of, but at least a lot of it was. But when it came down to picking out the casket, wow, I had no idea that some of them could cost as much as they did. And we talked about this earlier when you and I were talking before the show. A lot of times you're in that vulnerable position, and you don't want to look cheap by not getting mom a really nice casket, but
Mhm.
yet at the same time you don't feel like you can afford to, or that it's the smartest decision to make. So
Yeah.
you're kind of in a bad situation there.
Mhm.
So, what would you say to people like that?
I would say honoring your loved one does not equal how much money you spend on the service.
Yeah.
You have to make decisions that, benefit you as well, because after the service, you still have to take care of yourself. I'm sure there's
Mhm.
going to be medical bills, there's going to be mortgage that needs to be paid, all of these things that need to be taken care of. So just remember that. And just like everything else, when you go buy something, you do a little bit of research. I would say do a little bit of research when it comes to, we're talking about caskets, just caskets right now,
Mhm.
and know how much an 18 gauge casket costs, or how much a bronze casket costs. And that way, when you walk into a funeral home, you're able to compare the prices and not just see, well, this is a $5,000 casket, that has to be the price. There is no way that, it can be lowered. And also keep in mind that you don't necessarily have to buy the casket or the urn from the funeral home. You can go and purchase
Yeah.
whichever you need at, at your leisure. You can take your time, you can look. And uh, a lot of time, or funeral homes should have a casket price list as well as a general price list, which they
Mhm.
need to give to you by law. So when you walk into the room, the selection room where everything is placed, just look at the price list and then look at what is actually set out, because not everything that is on the list is in the selection room. And there are times when there may be something that is reasonably priced that you like the description, but because you can't see it, you may not select it, and that
Mhm.
may be the better option for you and your family.
Right,
Mhm.
right. We have a question from someone. Johnny Lee wants to know what would happen if we moved to another state later in life after we've already prepaid. That's a great question. That's
Mhm.
that's one I've thought about too.
Yes, thank you, Johnny, for that question. And um, it all depends on the insurance company that you use. So, one thing that everyone needs to know is you are not paying the funeral home directly when you prepay. You're paying an insurance company that is going to hold the funds until the death occurs. And so, what that does is it protects the consumer, such as, this case. Let's say someone moved to Oklahoma and they have an insurance policy with, I'm just going to say name, Funeral Directors Life Insurance Company here in Texas. If the funeral home in Oklahoma is able to use a policy, and for the most part, funeral homes do not say, I don't want to use it. But if they call the insurance company and they're able to obtain the information they need and file the paperwork, that policy is still uh, enforced and can still be used by another funeral home. It all depends. Of course, there are some insurance companies that require a few more documents. There's just a lot of little details that the funeral home would have to take care of. But for the
Mhm.
most part, the policy itself is enforced. It should be enforced in other states.
So if you do decide to move later in life, and
Mhm.
that's a situation that my husband and I are in, we probably will move to be closer to our son at some point. And I've thought about this myself, and I've hesitated
Mhm.
on pre-planning because we don't know where we're going to be. So that's good to know. And I would say
Mhm.
probably if you do move, then check with your whoever you purchase the policy from to find out if it's going to be valid with certain funeral homes in the area that you're moving
Mhm.
to. Would that be correct?
Correct. And there's one more thing I didn't mention. There are certain policies that you're able to add another service, and it's almost like a travel protection service. And so, again, if you moved to Oklahoma and you wanted to come back to Houston, or you moved to another state or another country, the additional, let's say, $500 that you would pay for that service would bring you back from any place that you are. So yeah, talk to
Great,
your funeral
great.
home and they should be able to provide that service.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And John Old Onstadt
Mhm.
also said most funeral homes are glad to honor the pre-needs purchased elsewhere. Just pretty much what you were saying,
Mhm.
because it means another family to serve in the future. Some policies are transferable as well, which makes another beneficiary. So yeah, the same thing. So that's good to know. We solved that problem. I'm glad to hear that.
Mhm.
Um, so there's a lot of benefits to pre-planning. There's a
Absolutely.
lot of benefits for the families. Like I said, having things taken care of before when you're in that really vulnerable and stressed state.
Mhm.
Um, to have things already laid out makes it a lot simpler. I know
Absolutely.
when my father died, and I was asked to go and pick out his the flowers, and I
Mhm.
sat in the car in front of the flower home and bawled my eyes out because my dad and I were connected with gardening. We used to
Mhm.
garden together when I was a little girl. And so it was a really hard thing for me to do to pick out flowers. So I had wished that that had been picked out for me so I didn't have to do that. But maybe that was
Absolutely.
part of the process, right?
Mhm. And
So,
I did want to add, again, people that already have pre-arrangements, I would go ahead and just bring them out. I know a lot of times they say, well, it's paid for, I'm just going to put it away. I would look over it one more time to make sure that you're not missing a key item that you'll need later on in the future. I've seen some pre-arrangements that don't include the outer burial container or the cemetery portion of it.
mhm.
I've seen some that the family thinks the casket is included, and when they go and look at the pre-arrangement, it's not there, and so that's an additional X amount of dollars. And it's always good just look over it one more time. Same thing with your cemetery documents. Make sure that um, if the opening and closing is not included, to just ask, how much is that going to be, and prepare your family members for that, so they know what to look for and what questions to
Mhm.
ask.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. So, one thing I want to touch on too before, well, a couple of things. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but
Mhm.
I do want to talk about what kind of information should families gather ahead of time. Um, Maybe you have a loved one who is getting up in age and maybe they have some health issues, or maybe you just want to be proactive. You don't have to be up in age and you don't have to have health issues to pre-plan, right? So, what kinds of things should they have to get put together ahead of time?
I would
That
say the most common information that people don't realize they're going to need is all of the information for the death certificate, and I'm going to touch on a few just because uh, little things such as the name. You have to make sure that your name is going to match the social security number. So if you have the social security card, I would make a copy of that and put it in the file as well, because that's how
Mhm.
they're going to be notified, especially if you're receiving funds that are being electronically placed in your bank. Um, there's also a few boxes that you're able to list AKAs. So if you have property that's listed under another name, you're probably going to need a death certificate to remove the name or transfer the titles, or start that process, and you want to make sure that there aren't any questions and that they can't say, well, the names don't match, so you have to go and get another document. Then of course, the residence address, both parents' names, and the mother's full maiden name. You'd be surprised. A lot of people, they don't know that. So uh, they only remember them by their married name, and then they have to call a brother or a sister and say, "Hey, do you know this information?" And but they're usually able to figure it out. And of course, the informant, the person that is providing the information, how you want their name listed and their address. Looking here, the final rest or the final place of disposition, and that can be if it's going to be a cremation, the crematory is going to be the name listed there. If it's burial, then it'll be the cemetery. See, there are a few things, of course, the marital status and the decedent's date of birth and where they were born. If it's a country outside, or if it's not the US, then it's just going to be the name of the country. There won't be a city attached to that. I would also say if you have that appointment of agent to control disposition, if you have it ready to go ahead and place that in the file. And any advance directives, I'm sure you know, Ms. Catherine, you're talking to a lot of families, even medical wishes. Some people do not want any medication, or they don't want any of that. They just want it to be a natural death and don't want to be at the hospital. They want to be at home. So those are some of the things I would definitely tell them to gather.
And Lacey just popped on the screen and said that agent to control disposition is very important as well. Yeah. So, and one thing I want to touch on, we've got just a couple of more minutes and I may run over just a tad, but there's a big movement I've seen, and you and I talked about it briefly, where a lot of people are going back to the church. Yes. They're going back to the church for the funerals. I mean, that's how it used to be a long time ago. And then we kind of moved away from that and had these big elaborate funerals in funeral facilities, funeral homes. And now the movement is going back to the church. Why do you think that is?
I think more people are seeking to be where, perfect example, we served a family that mother went to church for 50 years at this particular church, and the son didn't go or stopped going for whatever reason it is. But he knew his mother's wishes, and he knew that she wanted to have the service there. And after being loved on and, cared for, and it's a different experience than he had before. And he knew that now he had a group of people that were going to be there for him as emotional support. And some people want that. They want a family setting for their family. And things are just changing. Everything's changing.
So his mother was able to bring him back to the church after her death. And, hey, that's great. That's great. So thank you so much for coming on the program today. I wish we had more time. I know there's probably some things that we didn't get to touch on, but I think we got a lot of good information out there for people today. Again, I thank you for that. Anybody that is watching the replay and has a question, feel free to post it here. I'll make sure that either Barry or her partner, Lacey, gets in and answers that question for you. So thanks again, Lacey. I'm going to send Lacey back down to the lobby. And we're back at the Life After 50 show. I'm getting ready to wind it down today. Next month, we are going to take the first week off because Labor Day is next Monday. And so it's a holiday. But after that, we're going to have some great shows on next month. We're going to have keeping someone home with dementia, how to do that. Is it possible? What do you need to know about that? Then we're going to be talking with some Medicare experts because open enrollment is coming up in October. So you probably have some questions. And the last one next month I'm really excited about. It's how to activate your brain. So we all want better brain health. We all want to keep our brain as healthy as possible as we age. And we're going to learn about that from a company that is on the cutting edge with research and doing some amazing work. So look forward to seeing you on the new shows. And thank you for showing up on this show. Please, again, feel free to make any comments or questions below. We'll be sure to get somebody to answer those questions for you. Have a great day and enjoy life after 50, everybody.